Imagine waking up to find everything around you changed. Your home, your face, even your family. What if your entire life, the one you've known for years, was a lie? That's exactly what happened to David. But what he discovered was far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. It was just another morning, or at least it seemed like it. David slowly opened his eyes, feeling the soft sunlight creeping in through the curtains. The air was calm, the usual sound of birds chirping outside. But as his eyes adjusted to the surroundings, something felt off. He turned to his right, where the familiar picture frame of his wife, Sarah, smiled back at him. Except the photo didn't feel familiar. The room didn't feel familiar. He stood up, his head heavy with confusion. As he stumbled to the bathroom, he tried to steady himself. Everything was in its usual place. But why did it feel like he was walking in someone else's shoes? His reflection in the mirror made him stop in his tracks. His heart skipped a beat. The man staring back at him, he looked like David, but he wasn't. His features were slightly different, his hair slightly longer, his expression more worn down. He ran his fingers over his face, feeling the unfamiliar contours of his jawline. No, it couldn't be possible. This was him, wasn't it? Panic bubbled up inside him. He slammed his hand against the sink. His heart was racing, his thoughts scattered. "What's happening to me?" He gasped for air, hoping this was just some nightmare he could shake off. David's pulse quickened. He had to get out of the house. It was the only thing that felt like it might bring him some clarity. He made his way downstairs, each step heavy with dread. But when he entered the living room, things didn't get better. "David, you're up early today?" Sarah said cheerfully as she sat at the breakfast table. She smiled at him, a smile so sweet it almost seemed out of place. But there was something about it that didn't feel right. David blinked, feeling the urge to sit down and ask her every question flooding his mind. The children were at the table too. His children, or at least they looked like them. There was Emma, his daughter, and then Luke, his son, both staring up at him with innocent smiles. "Good morning, Dad," Emma chirped. Her voice was familiar, but her smile felt hollow, as though she were reading from a script. "Morning, honey," Sarah repeated, oblivious to the confusion in his eyes. He swallowed hard. "Who are these kids?" His voice felt foreign even to himself. Sarah raised an eyebrow, the laughter in her voice sounding more strained than usual. "What do you mean? These are our kids, Emma and Luke." David's mind swirled. He blinked and looked at the kids again. They looked like his kids. Their faces, their mannerisms, their voices. They were perfect replicas of his children. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember them. "Are you feeling all right, hon?" Sarah asked, her tone now laced with concern. She got up and placed a hand on his shoulder. I don't know," he muttered. His heart was racing again. Something's not right. David could feel the walls closing in on him. Nothing about today felt normal. He excused himself and stepped outside, desperate for air, desperate to clear his mind. But the moment he stepped outside, he froze. The neighborhood looked different. The houses were all the same, but there was an eerie stillness to the place. No sounds of children playing, no dogs barking. Just silence. He walked to his car, his mind reeling. His hands trembled as he touched the door handle. But this wasn't his car. He knew that much. It looked the same on the outside, but the license plate was wrong. The interior smelled unfamiliar, like it belonged to a stranger. His breath caught in his throat. What was happening to me? He thought. Panicked, he reached for his phone to call someone. Anyone. But when he unlocked it, a chill ran down his spine. His contacts, his messages, even his pictures. Everything was gone. In their place were strange names, numbers, and messages he couldn't understand. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This is not my life, he realized. But how? How could everything be different? Was he losing his mind? David was on the verge of losing control. Every corner he turned, the world felt less real, more like a simulation. He rushed back into the house, his breath shallow, his mind racing. He grabbed the calendar off the wall. It was a way to anchor himself. But when he saw the date, his world crumbled. The year read 2027. It was supposed to be 2023. His pulse skyrocketed. His entire life had just shifted 4 years forward, and he had no memory of it. No memory of how he got here, how his family had changed, how he had changed. Then it hit him. His memories didn't match up with the new reality he was living in. He couldn't recall the past 4 years. There were gaps, blanks in his memory. David stumbled backward and fell to the ground, his eyes glued to the calendar. This wasn't just a dream. This was something far worse. And that's when he found it. Hidden in a drawer, buried under a pile of papers, was a journal. He flicked through the pages, each one written in a shaky hand, describing an experiment that involved altering the reality of a man, him, by forcing him into a new life every decade. It wasn't just a glitch. It was a manipulation of memory, a replacement of reality. His entire life, his family, his identity, all part of a twisted social experiment. David could barely breathe. He tried to piece together the broken fragments of his mind. It wasn't just a coincidence. He wasn't really David anymore. He was a subject in a sinister program, a program designed to reset his life every few years. He had been inserted into different versions of reality before, each one more convincing than the last. But this time, he had remembered. But why? Why now? Why was he starting to break free from the illusion? He tried to confront Sarah, but her smile only deepened the pit in his stomach. Sarah, this isn't real. None of this is real. You aren't real. His voice cracked. His eyes were wide with fear, his hands shaking. Sarah stared at him, unblinking. You need to stop. You're scaring the kids, she whispered softly. Then, something else happened. A man entered the room. A man who looked just like him. David's heart skipped a beat. Hello, David, the man said, his voice calm. Too calm. It's time. David took a step back, his mind racing. This was impossible. Who are you? He demanded. I'm you, the man replied. I've been here before, just like you. This is the next cycle, the reset. David's head spun. The man who looked like him was part of the experiment too. He had lived this life before, just as David had. But why hadn't he remembered? The other man stepped forward, his gaze unsettling. We're all part of the same program. Your life, your family, none of it's real. It never was. David's knees buckled beneath him. He was trapped in a web of lies, cycles, and memories that weren't his. And the worst part? He couldn't escape it. As the man moved closer, David looked at Sarah and the children. They were all actors. They had to be. Why are you doing this? Why am I here? The man gave him a small smile. You're here because you remember, and because you're the one who will break the cycle. Or will you? David stared at him, feeling the weight of his words sink in. What did he mean? The man turned and walked out the door. As it slammed shut behind him, David was left standing in the living room, facing his own reflection once again. Is any of this real? He whispered to himself. And then the answer came, or at least the realization. Reality was just a construct, and no matter how hard he tried, it would never be his.